Well, hello again, everybody. This is Jack Zemlicka, Managing Editor for Strip-Till Farmer, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the next episode in our Strip-Till Farmer webinar series. Today's event is brought to you and other pre-registrants free, courtesy of Ingersoll. And in today's event, I'm going to share and evaluate the results of our 2019 benchmark study, which is based on the responses of more than 200 farmers from 23 states. And we're going to take a look at equipment preferences, some cover cropping methods, berm building strategies, fertilization practices, and get into some precision technology adoption. So before we begin this morning, just a quick housekeeping item. For any reason, your internet connection or our connection should happen to fail at some point, and it looks like the webinar has been interrupted. You can go back to the email confirmation you received, and that'll give you the opportunity to rejoin the webinar and pick back up. So again, thanks for joining us. I just wanted to give everybody a quick intro here on there we go. A little bit about us for those that may not be as familiar. So we obviously have a pretty detailed ag division here, particularly on the farmer side. Many of you may be familiar with our strip-till property, in particular our strip-till conference, which is coming up here in a couple of weeks, August 1st and 2nd in Peoria. Our strip-till print publication and our podcast, and also our no-till farmer title and the no-tillage conference, which will be coming up 20th annual event next January in St. Louis. So before we get going into the program, I just wanted to take a moment and thank and recognize Ingersoll Tillage Group for supporting this webinar and also the National Strip-Tillage Conference, and welcome in Roger Murdoch, who is going to offer a little bit of an insight into the event and has a special message for you with a priority offer for our Strip-Till audience.
It's Strip-Till Conference time again. As a title sponsor of the National Strip-Tillage Conference, I want to extend a special offer to you to join us at this year's event, coming up on August 1st and 2nd in Peoria, Illinois. Right now, receive a $45 discount on your registration to attend the 2019 Strip-Till Conference, as well as $50 off the cost to attend the interactive post-conference Soil Health Workshop with Frank Gibbs. To take advantage of these exclusive savings, call 866-839-8455 and mention priority code AgriSolutions, or register online at striptillconference.com, AgriSolutions.
Thank you again, Roger, and to Ingersoll for their support of today's webinar and also our National Strip-Tillage Conference. So let's get into some of the numbers here, and I just wanted to start out with a bit of an overview here of some of the things you're going to learn today. And again, as I had mentioned earlier, the data that we get and analyze here from our benchmark survey is taking a look at the prior cropping season. So in this case, we'll be looking at 2018. And again, had more than 200 farmers from 23 different states who identified themselves as strip tillers and participated in our 45-question survey. So again, you see a couple of things that we're going to address here today. We'll be taking a look at some of the geographic and demographic breakdowns, looking at some of the yield numbers. We'll also compare those with some of the no-till data that we've gathered on the yield side based on our no-till farmer benchmark study. So we'll take a look at some equipment setups, in particular some of the row unit sizes and row unit models that our participants are using. And we'll take a look as well as some berm building strategies, looking at depth and width and also timing. And definitely take a look at some of the cover cropping methods that strip tillers are putting to use. That's certainly an area of interest, an area of growth that we've seen, particularly on the strip-till side. And then we'll also take a look at some nutrient management practices, nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium applications, and some of the timing there, some of the most popular fertilizers being applied with strip-till rigs. And then we'll wrap up with taking a look at some of the precision preferences that strip tillers have in particular some of the more advanced technologies that strip tillers are putting to work on their operations. So getting into the geographic breakdown here, probably not all that surprising is what we've seen historically with our data, with the benchmark study, is the core of our strip tillers are located in the Corn Belt. And particularly we break down regions, Eastern Corn Belt, Great Lakes, Western Corn Belt, and you can see on the map there some of the regional differences that we've seen. One thing worth noting here is we did see about a 10-point uptick in percentage of respondents from the Eastern Corn Belt this year, and that's interesting. That kind of correlated with a little bit of a dip in the Western Corn Belt and also in the Northern Plains. So some interesting differences there, but more or less fairly consistent with what we've seen in the past. We did see a higher participation in the Northeast, and have certainly talked with some strip tillers and some companies out in that region over the last year or so about the emergence of strip till, particularly in New York State, with the diversity of crops they have out there, and hearing more about strip till adoption, which has been interesting. So a quick look there, snapshot of some of the most highly represented states. Typically have a very good representation from Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Indiana, Ohio, and we've seen some emergence in some of the other states in different parts of the country. Often have a few folks from out California, and again we'll have some insight on kind of California strip till, which I think is an interesting viewpoint at the Strip Till conference in a few weeks. So definitely looking forward to that. So took an opportunity here to break down, pull out some of the highlights just of some of the demographics here of the participants. And a couple of interesting things here in terms, I guess, of age versus experience and what we've learned this year. So as you can see, we've got a majority of strip tillers, at least 55 years old. Interesting, we had a study high of almost 1/3 who identified themselves as 65 or older. And it's interesting, what we had seen the last couple of years was more of a youth movement in kind of the strip till system, and had seen kind of more of the next generation starting to populate our data as far as kind of transitioning to the practice. And certainly had the opportunity to get on a number of farms where, I've had conversations both with maybe a father and an uncle, and maybe even a grandfather, and then, kind of bringing in their son or nephew or even daughter into the conversation to kind of talk about, some of that transition that's taking place on their farm. So, interesting to see the differences this year. I certainly would anticipate that there is somewhat of a youth movement going on here, and we tend to see that at our event, and also I guess out in the field visiting with farmers, that it's a broader generational interest here in terms of the practice. So, and kind of taking a look at experience, it didn't necessarily correlate with age, but we did see about a quarter of respondents who've been in the practice for more than 15 years. About 15% who've been in the practice for more than 20 years. But also, as you can see, the majority have been strip tilling 10 years or less. And, I think that shows that either folks are starting to get into the practice maybe a little bit later, transitioning, out of some of the other tillage systems they're in. We are seeing, kind of expansion in particular in certain areas of the country, in talking with farmers in the regions. We kind of saw that with the breakdown, particularly in the Northeast, where you're starting to see more pockets pop up, and the practice is becoming more popular, I think, particularly as we see a more national push for conservation practices to be adopted. So taking a look here at some of the tillage practices, getting into the acreage and yield. a few numbers that kind of popped out here with our study, and maybe not all that surprising, but we find that the majority of strip tillers are farming, roughly 2,000 acres or less. And we kind of, the sweet spot seem to be some of the smaller operations, perhaps, between the 500 and 1,500 acre farms, and not quite as many of the large acre operations that have adopted strip till fully on their farms. So that's not to say, there's not a portion of those farms that may be strip tilled. And as you can see, roughly 61% of total acreage that was identified here in the study is being strip tilled. That percentage is down compared to what we've seen the last couple of years. But again, it could be a diversity of tillage practices, maybe a smaller amount of acreage that's being strip tilled. Folks may be transitioning in, starting out with a smaller number of acres, and then potentially expanding on those in the future as they see positive results. So, not surprisingly, the vast majority, almost unanimously, corn is being strip tilled by respondents here. We've seen that, annually as the most popular crop in a strip till system. 45%, almost half of strip tilling soybeans last year, which is pretty on par with what we've seen in the past. Again, it'll be interesting next year, I think, to see if those numbers shift at all. I think there's a few numbers here that we'll talk about today that we may see some differences in next year with the data, depending on this spring, which I know was did not go according to plan for many of us. So a few other crops there, that we see popping up, and had the opportunity to talk with a few strip tillers here. Heard some interesting crops being strip tilled. More out west, getting us some more of the vegetables, tomatoes. Spoke with a farmer in the Midwest area that's strip tilling pumpkins, which I thought was pretty unique. So, seeing a lot of crop diversity here. Also hearing much more interest, if not yet transition, into organic practices, and seeing a few farmers that are having success transitioning strip till acres into certified organic acres. So that's a trend I think we'll want to keep an eye on here during the next few years for sure. Again, is that something that's becoming more prevalent on the radars of many, particularly the consumer side of things, but also hearing more farmers speak about opportunities within the organic system. And again, just a snapshot there as well of kind of the average strip till acreage per farm based on the responses. We did see average corn acres drop a bit from what we had seen in last year's study, in the last few, as a matter of fact. But we've also seen soybeans increase for the most part over the last few years. Again, those were down slightly over 2017, but for the most part, it's been pretty consistent and largely on an upswing over the last few years. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we do like to do is do some comparison here based on the data that we also collect through our no-till benchmark practices study. And it's always interesting to take a look particularly on the yield side with some of the data that we've accumulated over the years. And this is just a quick snapshot going back a few years on what we're seeing with average yields for our strip tillers and our no-tillers. And again, the no-till data is based on the no-till benchmark study. But as you can see, I mean, what we've kind of noticed each year, the corn yields have typically averaged, fairly to significantly higher than the no-till systems. Soybeans have been closer. We did see, record high average this year on the strip-till soybean side. Again, seeing those yields be pretty consistent over the last few years. And again, topping out at 63 in 2018. So, and again, just a quick snapshot there as well, breaking things down more by region in terms of the yield averages. You could see, obviously the Midwest, Northern Plains as well, kind of, inching up there around the 200 bushel acre. Obviously, Eastern Corn Belt, the participants that we had, had a very good year with soybeans and on down there. So overall, I mean, the numbers look pretty good correlating, in terms of yield. We've seen things increase fairly steadily in the history of this study. And again, a representation there for what folks saw in their fields in 2018. So taking a look here, in terms of how you guys are building your berms, what we're seeing is, again, for the 6th year since we've been doing this study, the majority are fall strip tillers. Although we did see that decline a bit here last year for the 2018 cropping season, less than half actually, and a little bit more diversity in terms of the timing of building strips. Obviously, the 2018 fall was not particularly accommodating in terms of getting strips built in many areas due to a pretty wet and damp fall and a fairly quick winter that came in parts of the country. So obviously, a little bit of a transition there. And again, I think we may see some of that correlation into the 2019 season, and I'll be curious to see if that had any impact on the percentage of farmers that perhaps got in and did some spring strip till this year and maybe went back and refreshed. So I would expect the depth here and the width will probably resonate with most of you. Typically, seeing that sweet spot is the 6 to 8 inches in terms of depth of a strip, 8 to 10 inches wide, and again, a smaller percentage, but pretty similar to what we've seen historically of farmers that are going to get out there and refresh strips in the spring, depending on how things shook out in the fall, or if there's a need to make that pass in the spring. So taking a look at row unit setups. Again, what we're seeing as the most popular setup is a shank style, and that's historically been the case here with our data that we've seen. Although, I mean, it's fairly evenly split, pretty diverse. And again, for folks maybe running a couple of different units, they may have different setups. Something they're going to run in the fall, something they're going to run in the spring that might be more of a coulter setup, something that's going to be a little lighter on the ground ahead of planting. So I did see a little bit of an uptake in strip tillers using mow knives after kind of a lower point in 2017. And then in terms of size, it did see some interesting differences there, a little more evened out in terms of the number of row units. 12 row had commonly, kind of been the most popular setup. Did see a jump here from folks running 16 row units, and then also a little bit of a jump up in folks running 6 row units. So again, could correlate with perhaps some of the smaller acreage folks that we had participate this year, and or possibly just getting into the practice, trying things out with a six row rig, maybe a demo model from a company. They're coming out and running a few acres, maybe a custom situation as well. So it'd be interesting to see, if there's a transition coming, or again, if that might be reflective of, perhaps people just getting into the practice, and that may evolve. So also an interesting side note here, this is something we've tracked as well. We will ask folks to indicate the horsepower tractor that they're using to pull their strip till rig, and we kind of average out those numbers. It's interesting, we've seen those numbers climb every year for the past 4 years, and around 2015 it was about 310 horsepower average tractor that was pulling a 12 row rig. 2018 we've seen that jump to 330, so not a significant increase, but we've seen an increase every year in the amount of horsepower needed to pull that average 12-row strip till rig. So. And then obviously residue management, a big part of the system here. And again, seeing the most popular residue management tools here, row cleaners on the planter, row cleaners on the strip till rig. So those are highly common, highly used tools to manage that residue before getting out and putting the seed in the ground. So also seeing about a third using a residue sizing tool with their combine, and again, that's a popular option as well. So a quick snapshot: we typically will track the brand of strip till rig that our audience is using, and just a quick breakdown here of the top 10 brands that we see reflected in our annual study, and again, just taking a look at I'm sure. Some of the names on this list probably certainly familiar with you out there, and obviously there's a lot of different options, and certainly some folks prefer to put their own together. Always nice to go out and meet some folks that are doing some innovative things and making some adjustments, obviously, that are going to accommodate their farm. So this is a new question that we actually added this year, and wanted to just get a sense for what some of the purchasing habits are of our audience, kind of where their mind is, what they're looking to invest in either this year and then what they're looking at for 2019. So again, a bit of a snapshot there. Planter attachments, kind of high on the list there of what was added this year and what strip tillers may be looking to add next year. So again, just a representation of some of the things that we've seen. In terms of seeding, again, with the planter attachments being kind of a number one on both lists here, in terms of planting populations, what we're seeing, they've averaged roughly around 33,000 for strip-tilled corn, and that's been pretty consistent, probably within a few hundred since we've been tracking in 2014. So not much variation there. I think where we are seeing some differences, in particular, is on the soybean side. And we've seen planting populations decrease fairly dramatically, probably over the last 5 years. 2014, we saw average planting populations up around 146,000. Seeing those decline to 2018, was closer to 136,000. So, almost a 10,000 population difference there on average. So that's been interesting to see. That's kind of correlated a little bit lower than what we're seeing on the no-till side. Corn planting populations for no-till, pretty similar to what we're seeing with strip-till. So taking a look here at some of the cover cropping practices, and this always tends to be a very hot item. I know when we talk to attendees at our strip-till conference, particularly over the last few years, one of the comments that we routinely get is attendees wanting to hear more about integrating cover crops into strip-till systems. And we've made an effort to try to add some more folks on the program that have experience and success in doing that. Have certainly, maybe made some mistakes, learned from them, and are willing to share some of their stories. And that's no different this year. We have some good folks lined up to share some of their strategies on the cover crop side. But as you can see, we've seen, pretty good growth, dating back to 2014 with our respondents who are seeding cover crops, hitting a high last year of more than 62% that said they seed covers. And again, you could see, it's been about a 14% growth that we've seen over the years. And again, this similar growth on the no-till side, certainly something that we've seen really be embraced by kind of the majority of our audience and the folks that are out there strip-tilling and no-tilling. So digging a little deeper here, cereal rye has consistently been the most popular variety as far as the most used cover crop among strip tillers. And you can see, obviously, there's a number of different varieties and certainly mixes, I think, that strip tillers are utilizing and, again, playing with on their operations. So we've seen, a lot of different, experiments, some that are working, some that have proved challenging. I think the key, in particular, getting out on farms, it's nice to see a lot of the strip tillers embracing and willing to try. Maybe it's only a few acres each year, but they're going to try to branch out with cover cropping. In a lot of cases, cover cropping may have come first, and they've been cover cropping for a number of years, and then are transitioning into strip till and kind of integrating it from that perspective, not necessarily strip tilling first and then adding the cover crop. So again, seeing an increasing partnership there with the way that those two elements really are fitting nicely in a strip till system. So as you can see, again, some of the species of varieties that are being used on strip till farms. So taking a closer look here at some of the equipment and the way that strip tillers are seeding their covers, we've seen, some modest changes over the years, but for the most part, strip tillers prefer to drill them in. Saw a little bit of an increase in spreading cover crops in 2018. And I think it's interesting, always get some comments. Had a chance to talk with and visit a few folks recently who are applying strip tills or cover crops with their strip till rigs. So being able to incorporate that. We'll see a little bit later. That's actually, there was a few comments that we got from the study here on strip tillers looking for more efficient ways to seed covers with their strip till rig, in terms of being able to measure that and I guess monitor that, on a row by row basis. So again, looking at the timing here, we've seen the majority that are going to see those covers within 24 hours of harvest. Or pre-harvest into an emerging crop, about 20% there that are looking to do that. And I thought it was interesting, more than half, are seeding multi-species of cover crops. So clearly, experimenting with some different mixes out there and working to see what's going to accommodate and really be compatible with their cropping system. And again, I think there's a lot of experimentation going on there and a lot to be learned here that we'll probably certainly track. This area in particular, we'll probably see some things evolve and change on the cover cropping side in strip till. So pretty exciting. So now jumping in and taking a look at, again, which is another big element when transitioning or obviously evolving a strip till system. And, we hear a lot about the accuracy, being able to target nutrient application within a strip till system is one of the key benefits here of strip till. So not surprisingly, 70% folks are banning that fertilizer and again going that 4 to 6 inch depth, which again seems to be kind of that sweet spot for a lot of strip tillers in terms of making those nutrients available to plants and roots. Seeing a little bit of an uptick in variable rate application and again pretty consistent use of a dry fertilizer box, but a 10 point increase over 2014. And similar to what we see on the no-till side, extremely high percentage of strip tillers owning their own sprayer and using those obviously for timing out those applications. So we broke down here a little snapshot of the 10 most popular fertilizers, most commonly used fertilizers we're seeing applied with the strip till rig. So, as you can see, the comparative numbers, 2017 to 18, pretty similar, some minor differences, a little bit of a dip in urea, 2018, a little bit of a dip in AMS. One of the interesting things, and we've noted this in past benchmark studies as we've kind of tracked this here, we've consistently seen the use of anhydrous decline each year. So, and again, it's noted there that use is down about 18% since 2014. So I know there's different camps there on use of anhydrous, but again, based on the numbers we're seeing, we've seen that decrease over the years. So obviously, there's a lot of other fertilizers, micronutrients that are applied here with the strip-till rig. Visited with one of our speakers in Nebraska, who's going to be out at the Strip-Till conference this summer. He had put together an interesting setup on his strip-till rig where he was testing on 300 acres this spring, a pretty unique micronutrient mix that he was putting right down when he was strip-tilling. But and this was, again, trying to jumpstart. He was trying to test out and see if there was going to be a quicker response, getting plants off to a faster start with this mix. And again, it's something he was adding some different micronutrients in. Again, just another option to see if that is going to have an impact on plant emergence. So I know that's something he's going to address at the conference. So if you're going to be out there, I'm sure he'll be sharing the results of what he learned from that experiment. So taking a closer look here on when nitrogen is applied, obviously a big element here, big part of many strip-till systems. Vast majority are using side dress application, and that's been very consistent year over year. Far and away the most popular timing to get that nitrogen out there. But again, we're seeing obviously multiple times when nitrogen is getting applied. So I think you'll hear some strip tillers talk about obviously those split applications being very valuable in timing those out rather than kind of the one-shot approach that might be in the fall. When strips are getting built, so kind of breaking those out, and also the manner in which the nitrogen is getting applied. Obviously, if we have about 18 to 20% of respondents here that say they irrigate strip-till crops, and fertigation can be a useful option, an efficient option there when making an application there during the season. So couple of other, noteworthy points there. We did see, kind of a drop there, low in fall applied nitrogen in the strip. So that's been interesting. Also saw a little bit of a dip in the spring strip application. So, and that's kind of been trending down over the last, 4 or 5 years. So something we'll certainly keep an eye on, see if that continues, if there's other ways that, kind of see more traction again, or things are going to even out with a little bit more of a split application approach. So taking a look here at P and K and when that is getting applied, in this case, majority of that is getting put down with the fall strips. That's been pretty common, pretty consistent. Again, though, we've seen that decrease a little bit since we've started collecting the data back in 2014. As you can see, lowest figure since 2014 that we saw this year, representing the 2018 season. So did see a bit of a bump there with spring strips in putting down that P and K. Also a little bit of a bump with that plant application as well. So and on down there. So a little bit of a dip in the foliar and fertigation side, but again, small percentages. So be interesting to see if those kind of correct next year or if those change. So taking a look here, precision practices, I know very commonly we'll hear about strip tillers that, will kind of say, well, if it wasn't for RTK, I'm not sure how I'd strip till. But that's not to say, there aren't strip tillers out there who are making it work without that level of correction. So roughly 81% of our respondents say they are using RTK in their strip till system. So, obviously the vast majority. And topping 80% for the fourth year in a row. So, clearly there's a high need for accuracy there, and a very high level of accuracy as well. So obviously when you're talking about following the planting right into that strip, if you are applying fertilizer there, RTK is obviously a very valuable tool on that. Interesting. We always ask this question as part of the type of GPS, or if you are using GPS, and 7% said they don't use GPS at all for strip till. So I'd be curious. I'd love to kind of talk more with them and find out, what they're doing, and how accurate they're able to be, and how that's correlating, with the system they have. So, but again, not everybody, is finding the need or using that RTK level correction, but for the most part, when talking with folks, they kind of see the two as going hand in hand. So as we do with strip till rigs, we do like to present a snapshot and kind of track year over year the brand of GPS guidance that strip tillers are using. And again, taking a look here at some of the top brands, these have been fairly consistent over the years. We've seen some modest variations, but certainly for the most part, I think there is more brand diversity when you're talking about not only equipment, but with precision technology on farms, and getting some of the different elements to be compatible. There's certainly been strides made there, but obviously when you're talking about guidance, things kind of start there with a system, and having a good, reliable product is obviously what strip tillers are looking for on their operation. So taking a broader look here, I guess a deeper look, you could say, at some of the other precision practices that are being utilized. And these are always particularly interesting. We see different strip tillers that, kind of have different needs on their operation, but also fairly progressive in wanting to adopt things. So, we've heard a lot about unmanned aerial vehicles here over the last several years. Fairly consistent use. Doesn't seem, perhaps this has taken off truly as a tool yet in strip till operations. Was having a conversation this week though about just the opportunity here on the precision side for technology to be utilized here in the late planting that we had in many parts of the country. And unmanned aerial vehicles was one of the tools that was cited as something that there could be room for growth to get out, do some early scouting of fields, and obviously kind of manage some of those in-field needs that might come up here, obviously, as we may expect a later harvest, to ensure that crop is going to be managed as well as it can be, and making use of maybe some of those scouting or even remote sensing tools is another option that I've heard mentioned here as something that may be a valuable option here this spring, summer, and as we get into early fall here. Implement guidance, certainly something that is an option when we're talking about improving the accuracy of planting, and obviously strip tilling to stay even closer on that strip and then in that planting zone. We've seen things progress pretty well here since 2014 in terms of the adoption of implement guidance. So hitting a high of almost 32% last year. So again, could be an emerging technology, and there's varying levels there, obviously passive and active implement guidance, but certainly what we're seeing here is an upward trend in adoption of those tools and what strip tillers are putting to work on their farm. So this is always one of my favorite questions that gets asked in the survey, and it's really neat to see some of the responses that come here, we do ask strip tillers to identify maybe something that's not on the market as of yet. Equipment, technology, just a practice that they kind of see. So it's a very forward-looking question, designed to be, and we always like to see the responses that we get. So I pulled a couple out here, just to provide a quick sampling of some of the comments we get. There's always a number of comments and suggestions that are centered around cover crops, and particularly precision technology. So, clearly looking at more ways, different ways to seed cover crops, high interest, and as I referred to earlier, with doing so with a strip till rig, looking at equipment compatibility. There have certainly been strides made there, but obviously, I think farmers are looking for more simplicity there in terms of being able to combine multiple brands of technology on their operation. And again, some more specific things in terms of what strip tillers are looking for on their units. Row sensors, row by row fertilizer shutoffs, and I know one of the big things that comes up, been a pretty hot topic. We had a number of strip tillers reference autonomous equipment, and clearly it's on their radar, something that is obviously being developed. And, it seems like in some cases, these guys are ready for it. So looking forward to it in terms of what they're seeing coming in the future. So with that, that's the data, that just a quick snapshot and an overview of what we accumulated here from our 2019 strip till benchmark study. Hope you've enjoyed this. I know I always enjoy going through the information and being able to compare things year over year. You can certainly find some of the historical coverage we've done with our benchmark study on our Strip Till Farmer website, and that's striptillfarmer.com, as you can see there. And you can look for more extended coverage of this year's Strip Till benchmark study in our Strip Till Farmer Summer Print Edition, and also our Summer Edition of No-Till Farmers Conservation Tillage Guide. So we have extensive breakdowns, further analysis of many of the categories that I discussed here with you today. And again, take the opportunity to go back and compare more in depth with some of the coverage that we've done in past benchmark studies. So again, just a quick reminder, and a thank you again to Roger Murdoch and Ingersoll Tillage for their support of this webinar and our 6th annual National Strip Tillage Conference coming up on August 1st and 2nd in Peoria, Illinois. And a reminder that you can take advantage of that $45 discount on full registration, plus a $50 discount on the Soil Health Workshop with Frank Gibbs that's going to be held immediately following the conclusion of the event on August 2nd. So again, you can redeem these savings by calling 866-839-8455 and mentioning priority code Agri Solutions. You can also visit our website, striptillfarmer.com/agrisolutions, to take advantage of this limited time offer there as well. So, well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you joining us today. That's all the time we have for today's program. And again, a reminder that you can take advantage and review this presentation and audio, which will be made available at striptillfarmer.com. So feel free to check it out, revisit some of the information and the topics that we covered here. And again, just another reminder to take advantage of that special registration discount, courtesy of Ingersoll and Agri Solutions, to attend this year's National Strip Tillage Conference in Peoria. On behalf of Roger Murdoch and the entire team at Ingersoll, thank you again for joining us today. I'm Jackson Licka. We'll see you next time.